Are you ready then?
It's recording, yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Hold on a second. Let me just... I'll just stay here a bit. I'll announce where we are in front of the stables, walk to the mansion, and then I'll go on. Okay.
Just remember, keep a distance.
The Lady of Lennox, Henry James called her, most celebrated of the cottagers. It was Edith Newbold Jones Wharton who achieved the distinction of moving in the social aura of early 20th century in Lennox and being at the same time a writer worthy of serious consideration. Edith Wharton's sojourn in the Berkshires lasted only about 10 years. She lived in Lennox from June to December of each year, from 1901 to 1911. Her coming to the country is explained by her increasing sense of frustration at the social round in Newport, a rigorous demand on her social graces which left her little time for creative work. Her marriage to Boston banker Edward J. Wharton was a marriage in name only. She had become disillusioned with him, and as his nervous illness heightened, she found it more and more difficult to endure his invalidism. She longed for the quiet of the country, away from watering place trivialities. She came to the Berkshire, was enchanted with what she saw, bought land close to Laurel Lake, and built the Mount. If I could have made the change sooner, she writes, in a backward glance, I dare say I should never have given thought to the literary delights of Paris or London, for life in the country was the only state which has always completely satisfied me, and I have never been able to gratify it even for a few weeks at a time. Now I was to know the joys of 6 or 7 months a year amongst fields and woods of my own, and the childish ecstasy of that first spring outing at Monadnock swept away all this in the deep joy of communion with the earth. On a slope overlooking the dark waters and densely wooded shores of Laurel Lake, we built a spacious and dignified home to which we gave the name of my great-grandfather's place, the Mount. There was a big kitchen table with a great pergola, a little farm and a flower garden outspread below the wide terrace overlooking the lake. There for over 10 years, I wrote contentedly, and should doubtless have ended my days there if not a grave change in my husband's health made the burden of property too heavy. But meantime, the Mount was to give me country cares and joys, long happy rides and drives through the wooded lanes of that loveliest of regions, the companionship of a few dear friends, and the freedom from trivial obligations, which was necessary if I was to go on with my writing. The Mount was my first real home, and though it is nearly 20 years since last I saw it, for I was too happy there ever to want to revisit it as a stranger, its blessed influence still lives in me. Edith Wharton was a strange mixture of qualities, both as a person and as a writer. She would not normally take up much of our time in a consideration of the history of Lennox, but she was a keen observer of the Berkshire scene, a critic of social manners and mores, and a largely unrecognized forerunner of what was to be the massive literary movement called realism. Many superficial critics today dismiss Edith Wharton as a social novelist who wrote about the precious world in which she moved, a world which concentrated primarily on the right folks, the distress intended upon a refused invitation, the decoration of houses, and the making of marriages a la mode. She is more than this. Her two novels of the Berkshire scene were Ethan Frome and Summer. The former, probably her best known book at present, and the latter her least known. These two novellas, for Ethan Frome, is only really a very long short story. She called it a novella. Deal with a side of life which we would think foreign to the knowledge of this cosmopolitan lady. At home in the salons of France, the country homes of England, and the summer villas of Newport, Ethan Frome is a wintry novel. Even the name of its principal character has a harsh New England grimness to it. If we know Edith Wharton as the writer of The House of Mirth, The Custom of the Country, and The Age of Innocence, it comes as a distinct shock to read of the world in which she portrays in the book Ethan Frome, a book of hardship, deprivation, poverty, bleakness, almost beyond bearing. It has been a literary exercise since the appearance of the book in 1911 to try to solve the puzzle of how Mrs. Wharton, secure in her motor car, in her vastness of her Lenox estate, she could have known this other world. One probably apocryphal story is that she stopped one day at a time-bitten storehouse for eggs, and the barren interior glimpsed, hardly relieved by the curt demeanor of the inhabitants, generated the creative impulse which resulted in the creation of Edith Frome. Is that good? That was pretty good. Hello. Here we are at the lovely estate of Sarah and George Morgan, known as Bedford Hall in Lenox. Behind me you see the beautiful Tudor-style mansion, 3 stories high, red brick with the lancet windows, all surrounded by brownstone. And this mansion was completed in the year 1893 and was designed by the architectural firm of Roche and Tilden. Now, Bedford Hall has a long and storied history that actually expands earlier than the Gilded Age, because sitting on the very site of the Bedford Hall that we see now was a much more modest home of the Haggerty family. And here, at this very spot, the hero of the Massachusetts 54th spent his honeymoon with the daughter of the Haggertys, Annie Haggerty. And that was probably the last really happy, carefree time for Mr. Shaw, because he went down to fight in battle later on that year, and he died with his men. As told in the story of the movie, in the movie Glory. Now I'm just going to walk around and the estate itself. It's very large. Now, when this house was built, it was one of the first of the big houses that was built here in Lenox during the Gilded Age. And it was known to be a cottage. And all cottages have to follow what they call the 30-30 rule. And that is, they have 30 rooms, at least 30 rooms, and they're on 30 acres of land. The front with the porte cochere, it's typical of these designs that the back of the house incorporates the view with a long veranda. And here we see the veranda in the back, and then the long view over the lawn, and all of those trees which have just popped up that weren't there in the past are blocking the very famous view of Bedford Hall. Now, Sarah Morgan, she was really old money. She didn't make money, she just inherited it. Her brother was J.P. Morgan, the famous financier of the Gilded Age, but her father really began the family fortunes when he started a banking firm in London. And here you can see that
Sarah has built herself a very impressive house here that shows so well up on the high hill. You can see the back views. Can you grab those in? Now, the lifestyle that was carried on in these great houses, very much like an English country home. And the style of this house, being a Jacobean revival home, really harkens back to the time of Henry VIII in England, a copy of that. The house was never really meant to look new or modern. It was meant to be old and established. And it certainly pops out that sort of ostentation that was new and just becoming a part of the American landscape. So now you'll see big houses and things like that. And all along, these would have been beautifully landscaped carriage rides. And Sarah certainly maintained beautiful gardens and all of those things that you would expect from a very proper English home. Now, Sarah Morgan had 3 children, and she certainly meant the house to pass on from generation to generation. But that wasn't to be the case, because Sarah Morgan passed away quite young while she was on a trip to Germany. And when the house finally was inherited by her children, already the Gilded Age was beginning to wane, and society had moved away from the maintenance of these very expensive estates, which required so many workers and so much labor and even so much to heat and maintain them. And then the country was falling into its sort of decline before the First World War. And then you just end up with a big, huge mansion that nobody really knew what to do with. Vintner Hall is certainly one of those stories. It eventually fell into complete decay, as it was abandoned for 10 years, and rain was allowed to come in. Now, behind me, you see what these grounds are that I'm walking into now, were where 6 large, very large greenhouses were, and they were all destroyed. And now you can see that the story of the Gilded Age in Lenox is really about what people can make of it and improve of it, and just see if there's anything left to tell except for the story. I know we're going to follow down on the carriage road a little further on the estate and take a look at the carriage house, which is still standing. Certainly there's no real reason for carriage houses anymore, but in the Gilded Age it was very important that you had a carriage house, because that's what society was about here. Taking out your carriages, buying horses, wearing the proper clothing while you're driving around, and being social with the very important people that live on these estates that surround you. Sarah's neighbors on Kemble Street with Furlinghausen, the Alexanders. There's Edith Wharton's home down the street, and further on the Patterson estate, which is Blantyre, and on the other side of that street, that's Windhurst, the Sloane family that marries so well into the Vanderbilts and makes friends with the president. So most of the visiting presidents were actually up at Windhurst. So now we're just walking down a carriage road and down to that really impressive carriage house standing on the ground, just waiting for, what will become of it. It's one of the very few of the large carriage houses that are still standing in Lenox, and it definitely harkens back to another time in Lenox where the lifestyle is just very different from what we are experiencing today. And I just want to grab that film, make sure that you start to see it. Again, in the same style as the house, red brick, and upstairs here at the carriage house, there was the dormitories for the men that worked on the estate. The women that worked on the estate, they lived in the 3rd floor of the mansion itself. You can see it there. We've improved it significantly. The beautiful keyhole facade again that matches the mansion itself. And there it is. The carriage house at Brentford Hall.